doing a little get ready with me chit chat story time video about my childhood home and the goings on in that house. Not like with ghosts, not just like random things that went on, because we'd be here forever. What are you talking about? Hi everyone, welcome back. So today I'm going to be doing a get ready with me while I talk about my childhood home, which had a few spooky things going on. It was most definitely haunted. Been wanting to do this video for ages. Probably should have saved it for like October, but never mind. And I wanted to film a few other videos today anyway, so I thought I would tell you about my childhood home while I got ready for today. So let's jump in. So I did just want to start off by saying that nothing that happened in the house was like evil or menacing. Like, there was nice ghosts. So just to make that clear, it's not like gonna be a really scary story. But you'll see. Okay, so I moved into my childhood home when I was 5 years old. So we moved from a different address to the new address. And on the first night that we were there, or after the first night that we were there, when we woke up the next day, obviously mum and dad were obviously excited to have this new bigger home. We'd moved from a 2 up 2 down to a 3-bedroomed house in a much nicer area. So mum and dad were going up in the world, you know, they'd worked hard and they'd got this bigger, nicer house in a nicer area. And after the first night, my mum asked how I liked the house. Do you like the new house? And I was like, no. And I always felt that there was something there from the get-go. I didn't know what it was. I just felt uneasy in the house. It meant for years that I would lie awake for hours on end of a night time because I was so scared to go to sleep. I used to have a night light on like constantly, and as I got older and a bit too old for the night light, I used to sleep with the bedroom door open and the landing light on, obviously until my mum and dad came to bed, and then our dog would come up and sleep on the top of the landing. So I was just like terrified. Not terrified, but I just never felt that I was alone, if that makes sense, in my room. I always felt like there was something there. And I actually slept with the door open and the landing light on until I was about 14 years of age. That's how bad it was. And I used to want to be in bed with either my mum or my dad. So my dad used to work shifts, so a lot of nights when he was working he wouldn't be there, so I could sleep in the bed with my mum. And when my mum used to go on courses with her work and she'd be gone for like 2 or 3 nights, I'd be like, Dad, can I sleep with you? Because I didn't want to be alone. Although I absolutely hated my mum and dad's bedroom. There was just something about my mum and dad's bedroom. So even when I was like, I want to sleep in your bed, I wouldn't properly sleep until either my mum or dad were in the bed with me. And obviously I'd go to bed a good few hours before my mum and dad would come up to bed, and I would most of the time be awake for all that time because I was too scared to go to sleep, or it would take me hours to drop off. very often I would hear voices downstairs, people talking, but not loud enough or clear enough for me to be able to hear exactly what was being said. And this happened throughout the whole time that I lived there. I didn't move out until my late 20s, so that's how long it was going on for. And I mean, you get used to it, but there was definitely times. Mum and Dad had another house in Wales, which they eventually retired to, so they would be there most weekends, so I would have most weekends in the house by myself. And even as an adult in my 20s, I'd wake up and think that somebody was in the house, and then the sound would eventually, because you couldn't hear anybody clattering about or anything like that, it was just voices, and you realise it's just the ghosts chatting away to themselves. But there was different voices. It'd be like men and women. It was more than one voice, and that was just a constant throughout being there. And I always had a really uneasy feeling in our hallway, our stairs and the top of the landing. And it wasn't helped by the fact that if our living room door was open, so our living room door went out into the hallway, and our dog used to lie by the radiator facing the door. So if the door was open, our dog would watch things walking up and down the hallway, and every now and again he would watch something come into the room. He wasn't scared or anything like that, but he was definitely watching something, and I could never sit in the front room with the door open. Even now as an adult, I don't like sitting with the doors open. My husband's like, what is your obsession with closing doors when you're in a room? I'm just like, well, the ghosts can just be walking in. I know they can walk in anyway, the ghosts, they can do what they want, but it's like, it's an invitation. The door's open, come in, and I'm like, oh, I'd rather you didn't. Do you know what I mean? So I prefer to have doors shut. So like I said, I always felt like I wasn't alone when I was in my bedroom. I always felt like I was being watched when I was in my bedroom. Not in a malicious way or anything like that, but there was just something there. And of a night time, I would hear, you know, you get to know your house and which floorboards creak when you walk on them, and I knew which floorboards creaked in my bedroom. So I would hear footsteps walking around my bed of a night time, and there were times when I would feel what felt like breathing on my face, and it would wake me up, and I'd turn over and I'd hear the footsteps walk around my bed, and then after a couple of minutes the breathing would start up again on my face, which is delightful. So I remember one time I walked into my bedroom, I'd nipped downstairs to get like a drink or something, and I came back up and a school book that I had sitting on my dressing table, which was nowhere near the edge of the dressing table, so there was no way it could have just fallen off by itself. As I walked back into my room, it fell on the floor. So I don't know how it was, but it sort of like startled me because it shouldn't have fallen off. There was absolutely no way it could have fallen off unless it was picked up and dropped or pushed off the side. So I was a bit like, what's going on? Another time, I used to have, like, you know those sets that used to be on dressing tables, and it'd be like a mirror, a brush and a comb. And I went to a lot of stately homes, like Royal Trust places when I was a kid. I love all that, and I just thought that that was like the height of sophistication was to have like these sets on a dressing table. I don't know who I thought I was, old before my time, but I had one of these sets. When my room got decorated and got me new furniture and I got my dressing table, I wanted one of these sets on my dressing table. And the brush, I never used it, it was just for decoration basically, and the bristles were really, really hard and it would just sit flat like this. So the brush sat flat like that, and again, another time I was walking into my bedroom and the brush just fell over onto its side. Never done that before, didn't do it since, it just fell over onto its side. So again, who's touching me stuff? Who's messing about with me stuff? So like I say, I always used to keep my bedroom door open over night time when I was asleep, and our smallest bedroom used to face like the entry, and in the entry there was a street lamp, and the light from the street lamp used to shine through that window and illuminate like part of the landing and stuff. So even when our landing light was off, there was some light coming from this street lamp through the littlest bedroom's window. And one night I woke up and I was just like, couldn't get back to sleep, and I just glanced at my doorway, and in the doorway was the silhouette of what I can only describe as, because it was just a black figure. There wasn't any like distinguishing features about it other than it had on one of those old-fashioned like nurses, you know, like the boxy nurses hats on, and that's the only thing that I could think of that was just the silhouette of a nurse standing in my doorway, and it was there for a good few seconds before it just kind of like faded away, and then there was nothing in the doorway again. So that was a bit spooky. So this is really random, but I had a hamster called Shabba, and when I used to let him out to play and whatever, I would like leave like treats around my room that he could like find, and he used to like go around collecting all the treats, and he would always go to one corner of my room and hide the food. I obviously wouldn't leave it there, but that would be like his thing, and as he was like out playing, he would go there if he fancied a snack and just have a little nibble, and you could hear him like crunching away. Just had to change the battery, so where was I? Shabba. So yeah, he would be like running around, collecting all the food, sticking it in the corner, having a little munch and whatever. And after he died, it must have been 1 or 2 nights after he died, I wasn't asleep, so it wasn't like I'd woken up and had been dreaming it. I was fully awake, I hadn't yet fallen asleep, and I heard in that corner of the room crunching like a hamster eating food. Exact same sound as when Shabba would be in that corner eating his treats. I am convinced that that one night the ghost of my hamster came and ate food in that corner. Convinced of it, absolutely convinced. It never happened again, never heard that sound ever again, but I know little Shabba, God bless him, came and had one little more treat in that corner. I'm telling you, it happened. So that's pretty much everything for like my experiences. It was just general feelings and a feeling of not being by myself when I was in a room by myself. I'm going to tell you about other people's experiences in the house. So when we first moved into the house, before we had the windows and doors replaced, my dad had noticed that there looked like there'd been and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, a mezuzah at the front, on the front door to the side. A mezuzah is a box with what's it called, parchment, a special parchment with verses from the Torah, if I'm right, that Jewish families will put on the front of the door. I think, I'm not explaining it very well, have a little Google. So my dad was like, oh, that's interesting. There must have been a Jewish family that lived here at some point. It wasn't the people that he bought the house off. There was, I think it was a landlord that was renting it out to students, and you should have seen the absolute kip of the decor. Oh my god, it was a show. But yeah, it definitely wasn't a Jewish family that my mum and dad bought the house from. So it must have been somebody, a family further back down. So my dad just noticed that and was like, oh, that's interesting. Sound. So as I mentioned before, my dad worked shifts, and very often he would get back home between like 11 o'clock at night and like 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. So anywhere between those times, depending on what shift pattern he was on. He'd been on a late shift on the Friday night, so he ended up getting back home at about 4 o'clock Saturday morning. And obviously me and my mum were in bed, and this is a few years after we'd moved in, and my dad heard a little girl say Sabbath. So the Sabbath is the 7th day, which is a Saturday in the Jewish religion. That instantly said to my dad that he was right about the mezuzah being on the front of the door, and he was like, there must be like the energy or something of a young Jewish girl in the house. So it kind of like tied in, if you know what I mean. So I just thought that was really interesting that he'd seen that, and then a few years later he'd heard this young girl's voice say the Sabbath on a Saturday morning. So that's that. So another one of my dad's shift patterns would be working early. So he'd start very, very early in the morning, and he used to work 12-hour shifts. So he used to like skip his dinner and stuff like that to try and get home early, but he would get home like 11 in the morning to like 1 in the afternoon, something like that. Just varied. And one day he came home, and obviously there was nobody in. I was in school, my mum was at work. And as soon as he walked into the house, there was an overpowering smell of lavender in the hallway and going into like the dining room. And he said it was really, really pungent, and he felt like an old lady had been there, like it smelt and felt like an old lady. So if my dad was already at work, I would be the last person to leave the house, because my mum would leave for work before I would leave for school. This is obviously when I was in senior school. So when I got home from school, my dad said, did you spray something before you left for school this morning? Really strong lavender smell. And I was like, no, I don't have anything that smells of lavender anyway, and I wouldn't spray anything in the hallway. I'd spray in my bedroom before I came downstairs. And I was just like, no, absolutely not, didn't spray anything. And he was like, it's so strange. Now I want you to remember this about the feeling of the old lady, so just remember this. So you know, like with shift work, when you finish and come home, you don't go to bed, or tend to go to bed straight away. You usually have like a couple of hours like wind down time. So again, my dad was up early hours, got home from work, winding down, just watching the telly, and in walks, through the living room door that was open, a ghost of a little boy. And I know that sounds crazy, right, but my dad just is not, he just wouldn't make this stuff up. The little boy walked in and sat where our couch was, but not at the same height as our couch, as though he was sitting on something that used to be there. And he was looking over at our telly, but it wasn't like he was looking at the telly, if that makes sense. It was like he was looking at something again that used to be there. So obviously he didn't tell me this at the time. He waited until I was a bit older and had, you know, expressed that I thought that there was something in the house, and me and my dad always felt like there was something in the house. My mum wasn't, she was a skeptic about it all, but as I got older, me and my dad would tell each other like what we'd experienced and stuff like that. And so he was telling me about this little boy just walking in, and I was like, were you not like scared? And he was like, yeah, I was like proper pooing myself, but I didn't know what else to do. I was just like sat there, so I was just like, hello. So my dad said hello to the ghost. So my dad saw this little boy ghost. I can't remember what era he said he was dressed in, what clothing he was dressed in, but it obviously wasn't like from our lifetime. And I know at this point you're probably thinking, oh, your dad was just like messing around or like trying to scare you or whatnot, and you'd be, you know, well within your rights to think that. But then one night he came home with one of his friends after they'd been to the pub, and his friend was just going to come back to ours, have a couple more drinks and then go home. So he was sitting on the couch in the living room, door open, and my dad was in the kitchen getting them like a drink each. When my dad came back into the living room, his friend said to him, oh, have you got your nephew staying? And my dad was like, no, it's just us and Samantha and Julie upstairs in bed. His mate was like, no, you must have a nephew staying or something, because a little boy's just popped his head round the door. And my dad was like, oh no, that's just the ghost. And my dad was like, I haven't seen him drink a pint as fast as he did, and then he got off, because his friend saw a little boy pop his head around our living room door and look into the room. So much so that he was convinced that we had a cousin, my mum and dad's nephew, staying with us in the house. So it wasn't just my dad who saw him, and it wasn't just that fella who saw the boy either. So moving on to my mum's experiences. Now, as I said, my mum was a massive skeptic. She didn't believe what me and my dad was saying. She was taking it with a pinch of salt. Not that she thought we were lying, but she was just like, are they like imagining stuff and whatever? Until one night she felt, so my dad was working, I was in bed, and my mum was obviously in her bed by herself, and she felt somebody sit on the edge of her bed on the corner down the bottom, and she said it really freaked her out, and she moved her feet away, and she said it physically felt like somebody sat on the edge of the bed, and it did really scare her. But she was like, no, you're just imagining it, blah blah blah. So a little while after that, and I don't know whether, you know, once you experience something and you kind of like get a bit of belief about the possibilities of what is happening, whether or not that opens you up to being a bit more sensitive to other things, I don't know. But a little while after that had happened with the bed, mum and dad had like a little lover's tiff, and so my mum was like fuming at my dad and like wasn't speaking to him, and he'd gone to work and whatever, and he was on a late, so he came back early hours of the morning. So when my mum woke up, she was still in bed. Mum woke up in the morning and she was like, she knew my dad was downstairs, and she was like deciding whether or not she was going to go down and still be fuming at him, or was going to like speak to him or whatnot. So she was just like lying there, and then she heard the door go, and she was like, oh, he's coming into the room, so I'm going to pretend to be asleep so that I don't have to speak to him just yet. So she was pretending to be asleep, and she heard what she thought was my dad come into the room, walk to stand, so she was on her side facing out of the bed, if that makes sense, and she felt my dad walk into the room and stand right in front of her and just stand there before walking out. So she said I was lying there thinking, what's he doing, the weirdo? But I didn't want to speak to him, so I didn't want to wake up and be like, what are you doing? So she just continued pretending that she was asleep. So she eventually went downstairs and they made up and whatever, and then my mum was like, what were you playing at, just walking in the room and standing there looking at me for? And my dad was like, what are you on about? And she was like, you came in this morning. I was awake, so I did know, and I did hear you come in and stand right in front of me and just stood there staring at me before you walked out. And my dad was like, hands down, did not do that. I didn't come into the room. I had no reason to, absolutely never did it. And that's really when my mum started believing that what me and my dad had been saying for all these years was probably true, because she'd then had her own experiences. So I just thought that that was really creepy, that she felt something walk into the room. She heard and felt something walk into the room, stand there and look at her before walking out. Creepy. So moving on to my cousin's experiences. So my cousin is 2 years younger than me, and we're both only children. We grew up together, basically. I class her as my sister, very close. And I was told to never tell her about like the spooky things that would happen in the house, because mum and dad didn't want her feeling scared being in our house and stuff like that. So she had no idea about what me and my dad had experienced. At this point my mum had never experienced what I've just spoke about. So back when line dancing was like the thing to do, my mum and my auntie, so my cousin's mum, used to go line dancing once a week for like fitness reasons. And at that point I was old enough to look after us for a couple of hours while they went out and did that. And my cousin would stay over on those nights as well, and we'd top and tail in my little single bed. And so one of these nights, obviously my cousin was staying over, and when we got into bed, again, I was still at the point where I was sleeping with the bedroom door open and the landing light on. So we were kind of like still awake, and like, you know what it's like with siblings or cousins when you're at that age and you fight like cat and dog and you just do whatever you can to wind each other up. So being like messing around, like kicking each other and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden my cousin yanked the duvet over her head. So obviously pulled it off me, and I was like, what are you doing? Trying to pull it back off her, and she had it like gripped over her, and I could feel her physically shaking in the bed. And I was like, oh my god, Jenny, you're all right? Like, what's wrong? And she was sobbing. She was absolutely sobbing, and she was like, I want to go downstairs to your mum. And I was like, right, okay. So we go down to see my mum, and my cousin is like bawling her eyes out and like shaking, and my mum's like, what's going on? And she said, I've just seen 2 ghosts. So me and mum like, what? So what she said happened was, she was just lying there and doors open, landing lights on, and she was just lying there with her eyes open, and then all these flashing lights just happened like around her. And the next thing is an old woman, remember the old lady that I talked about before that my dad felt with the lavender? An old lady stepped into the bedroom and was like looking into the bedroom and was doing this to somebody, and she was like looking round, and then she saw a little boy come out of the wall and walk behind the bottom of the bed, which was behind her, towards this old lady. And that's when she threw the blanket over her head when he was like passing behind her. And she was terrified, and I mean absolutely terrified. And she didn't know the stuff that my dad had told me about that he'd experienced. So it was just like, again, confirmation that what my dad had seen and felt was correct. So that's that one. So I'm just going to do some of my eyes without talking because my battery's flashing again. My other battery isn't charged full enough, so I'm trying to be quick, so I'm not going to speak, just going to get some of this done. I'm back, finished my eyes. I've had to change the battery on my camera, so I'm just going to continue with what I was saying while I do my lips. Can I do it while I'm doing my lips? Probably not. Okay, so that was not the last time that my cousin saw the little boy. So when I was about 15, 16, I used to look after my cousin during the 6 weeks holiday, so she got dropped off at ours, so she would have been like, what, 13, 14, and you know what you're like at that age, you like lie in bed till like 11, 12 o'clock and whatever. And my cousin had been dropped off first thing in the morning when her mum had gone to work, so she'd been sat downstairs, God love her, by herself for hours, and she kept coming up saying, Sammy, you're gonna get up now, you're gonna get up, because she was bored and she wanted company, and I was like, yeah, I'll get up in a minute, and that would go straight back to sleep. So the last time she came up, she was stood in my doorway and was like, come on, are you getting up? And I was like, yeah, I'll get up now. And I did get up. I was ready to get up at that point. But where my bed used to be, I used to have two like cupboards either side of my bed, like built-in cupboards, and on this side it was my wardrobe, and on my left hand side was like where all my junk used to go in. And messy teenager had the habit of just like leaving the doors open and not shutting them properly, and the door on me junk cupboard used to always be like open. So my cousin stands in there and she's like, you definitely getting up now? And I was like, yeah, and she was like, you know, being sat downstairs for ages by myself. And then she just stopped and she was just stood there for ages and then walked away and went downstairs, and I was like, what's she doing? So I got up, went downstairs, and I was like, what was wrong with you then? You just went dead weird. And she said, I've just seen him again. And I was like, who? She said, the little boy was stood in your cupboard to the left, the junk cupboard with the doors open, and he was just stood in the cupboard looking out at me. I was just like, right, okay. So from then on, that cupboard door got shut all the time because I didn't want no ghosts in my cupboard looking out of the open cupboard doors. So that was that. I think that was the last time she ever saw him now. So she's seen the little boy twice. So the last story is actually about one of my friends. So the day that William and Kate got married, we'd arranged for him to come round, we'd watch the wedding, and then we would go out later on in the evening. So we come round first thing in the morning with Mackie's breakfast, nice one, and then we watched William and Kate get married. We had William and Kate masks that we were wearing while we were watching it because we were a pair of shadows. And then we were going to go for food and go out like to the clubs afterwards. So in the evening time, he was downstairs watching telly and I was upstairs getting ready for us to go out. And after about say 45 minutes to an hour or something, he came upstairs and he was like, can I sit in here with you? And I was like, of course you can, stick the telly on, whatever. And he was like, I've just fallen asleep downstairs and something has just shook me awake. And I was like, what? Because at this point nobody had been touched by anything in our house at all. This was like the first time I'd been told that anybody had been touched. So he said I was asleep on the couch sitting up, I had my arm on the armrest, and something has just shook my arm and woke me up, and I thought it was you and that you were finished getting ready and you were waking me up. And he was like, so I'm absolutely pooing myself. Is your house haunted? So obviously I was like, yeah, I'll explain, and told him all about it. But he was like, that was the freakiest thing ever. I was literally shook, awoke. Shook, awoke. woke. Well, that's right, isn't it? Shook, awoke. Anyway, somebody shook him and he woke up. And it wasn't me, and we were the only two people in the house. So that was probably like the creepiest thing, because somebody's actually been touched by something that you couldn't see. But it was never malicious or anything like that. So that's it. That's the stories of what happened in my haunted childhood home. I do have other stories about other things and other experiences that I've had, that my dad's had, and stuff like that. If you'd be interested in hearing them, I might talk about them further down the line. But that is everything for this video. So if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more, then please subscribe. Bye!